Did I ruin dinner by reacting badly at a hibachi restaurant? My husband and I have been together for more than 2 decades, and lately life has been stressful in ways I do not think he fully understands. He has been out of work for a while, so financially everything rests on my shoulders right now. Usually I can handle that pressure, but last week at work was brutal. I got pulled into a situation involving mistakes made by the person before me, and for several days I genuinely thought I might lose my job over it. There were non-stop meetings, endless calls, and constant emails trying to sort everything out. Even though the issue was eventually cleared up by Friday night, I felt emotionally wrung out and exhausted. All I wanted was a quiet evening at home. My husband, however, was determined to go to his favourite hibachi restaurant. I told him repeatedly that I was tired and not really in the mood to go anywhere loud or social, but he kept insisting it would help me relax and that all I had to do was sit there and eat. Eventually I gave in because I did not want to argue anymore. The restaurant was packed and incredibly noisy. Since it was just the two of us, we were seated quickly at the grill with a large, energetic group already there. They were laughing loudly, joking constantly, and clearly ready for a big night out. I already felt out of place before the cooking even started. When the chef came over, he immediately looked at me and asked whether I was okay. I politely said yes. A few minutes later he asked again, saying I did not look well. I smiled as best I could and reassured him I was fine. Then he kept going. He started asking if I was angry. He joked dramatically about whether I was secretly upset with him. The table laughed, and I tried to laugh lightly too, even though I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. I know I naturally have a serious expression when I am tired, and I suddenly became hyper-aware that apparently everyone at the table was now focused on my face. Then one of the women in the group chimed in and said something beginning with, "Do not worry about her, she's just..." Right at that moment there was a burst of noise around the restaurant, and I genuinely did not hear the rest of the sentence. But whatever she said caused the chef and several people at the table to laugh while looking directly at me. That was the moment everything hit me emotionally. After the week I had just survived, sitting there feeling singled out and laughed at by strangers was suddenly too much. I felt myself getting embarrassed and emotional, and I quietly told my husband I wanted my food packed up because I was going to wait in the car. Instead of supporting me, he became irritated immediately and told me to stop making a scene and sit back down. I told him I felt like people were mocking me. He insisted nobody was making fun of me and acted like I was overreacting. I ended up staying, but the atmosphere at the table completely changed afterward. Everyone became quiet and awkward. The loud joking stopped almost entirely, people boxed their food quickly, and the whole dinner fizzled out in uncomfortable silence. On the drive home, my husband blamed me for ruining the entire evening. I kept asking him what exactly the woman had said because if I misunderstood things, I genuinely wanted to know. Eventually he admitted he had not actually heard her either. But he still insisted none of it justified my reaction. Now I keep replaying the whole night, wondering if I was simply too emotionally drained to handle harmless teasing, or if I had every right to feel humiliated after becoming the center of attention in a room full of strangers when I was already hanging on by a thread emotionally. Was I wrong for saying my dad acts like he has a permanent period? I ended up in an argument with my dad after a family dinner, and I genuinely thought we were all joking around until he later told me I humiliated him in front of everyone. We were having dinner with family friends, and the conversation somehow drifted into the usual men versus women type jokes. My dad started talking with his friend about how difficult it is living in a house full of women. He kept making comments about women becoming impossible during their periods and how the entire mood of the house changes every month because of it. The thing is, he says stuff like this pretty often. He was laughing while saying it, and his friend was laughing too, talking about how grateful he was to have sons instead of daughters. Meanwhile, my sisters and I were just sitting there listening to them act like women become unbearable monsters for a week every month. What annoyed me most was how exaggerated it all was. My sisters and I are honestly pretty calm people. We all played sports growing up, handled school, jobs, stress, and normal life without dramatic meltdowns. If anything, most of the tension in our house over the years usually came from my dad getting irritated over small things and then blaming everyone else for reacting to him. So after listening to him go on for several minutes, I joked back that honestly having a son exactly like him would probably be worse because he is already moody and irritable all the time anyway. I said it was basically like he has a permanent period himself. The entire table laughed immediately, including his friend and his friend's wife. Then the wife jokingly turned to her own husband and said he acts the same way too. At the time, it genuinely felt like commerce back and forth. Nobody seemed uncomfortable. Nobody went silent. It felt like the exact same energy my dad had been using the entire conversation. But later that night, my dad pulled me aside and said I embarrassed him badly in front of his friend. He said it was disrespectful to compare a man to having a period and that I made him look weak and unmanly in front of people he cares about impressing. That honestly surprised me because from my perspective, he had spent the entire dinner making broad jokes about women being emotional and difficult because of hormones. I felt like I was simply throwing the same kind of joke back at him. Now he's acting like I crossed some major line, while I still feel like if someone dishes out those jokes constantly, they should be able to handle one aim back at them too. Did I offend my father by refusing his sleeping arrangement before our trip? I'm extremely close with my father, which is why this entire situation is bothering me more than it probably should. He is genuinely one of the most important people in my life, and growing up I always respected his rules without much pushback. We rarely fight, so the fact that this turned into tension between us has been eating at me. My boyfriend and I are leaving for an international trip this week, and our flight leaves at an absolutely brutal hour. We need to be at the airport around 2:30 in the morning, meaning we would have to leave ridiculously early if we stayed at either my apartment or his place because both are nearly an hour away from the airport. My parents, on the other hand, live much closer. Maybe 15 minutes away. When my mother suggested we stay there the night before and let them drive us to the airport, it sounded perfect. No expensive airport parking, no exhausting overnight drive, no stress. I honestly thought it was a really thoughtful offer. Then my father pulled me aside. He explained that my boyfriend was absolutely welcome to stay over, but under no circumstances would we be sleeping in the same room because we are not married. He said my boyfriend would have to sleep in the downstairs guest room while I stayed in my old bedroom. My mother did not care at all, but my father was firm about it. Now I want to make it clear that I understand it is his house. I was not trying to demand anything or disrespect him. He has always been traditional about certain things, and I knew this topic could eventually come up because this is my first serious relationship. But something about the situation made me deeply uncomfortable. My boyfriend and I are adults in a committed relationship, not teenagers trying to sneak around. The idea of us awkwardly being separated for a few hours before a flight in the middle of the night suddenly made the whole arrangement feel tense and weird instead of helpful. So rather than arguing, I calmly told my father we would just stay at my apartment instead and drive ourselves to the airport. I genuinely thought that was the mature solution. Instead, he got upset almost immediately. He started insisting he wanted to drive us and could not understand why I was making such a huge issue out of separate bedrooms. I explained that I was trying to respect his comfort level while also respecting my own. If he did not feel okay with us sharing a room in his home, then staying somewhere else simply seemed easier for everyone. But apparently that made things worse. Now he seems hurt and offended that I would rather wake up in the middle of the night and spend nearly an hour driving than stay under his roof with his rules. The conversation became awkward fast, and I could tell he took my decision personally. What makes this even more stressful is that my boyfriend has absolutely no idea this conversation even happened. I have always respected my father's boundaries before, and this is the first time I have ever even considered asking for something like this because the circumstances seem practical. Now I'm sitting here wondering if I accidentally insulted my father by declining his arrangement, or if I actually handled this in the most respectful way possible without making either of us uncomfortable. Was I wrong for secretly keeping food aside for my niece? About half a year ago, my brother moved into my house with his wife and their 3 children while they tried to rebuild financially after relocating across the country. My wife and I agreed because we had the space, and honestly things have been fairly peaceful overall. The biggest adjustment has probably been the amount of food disappearing from the kitchen every day. Their 2 sons are both teenage athletes, one heavily involved in basketball and the other obsessed with competitive running. Those boys eat like absolute machines. I'm talking giant portions at dinner, multiple second helpings, and entire boxes of snacks disappearing almost overnight. At first I just laughed about it because teenage boys are known for inhaling food. But after a while I started noticing something uncomfortable. Their daughter, who was around 14, was constantly ending up with scraps. I would hear her open the pantry and complain there was barely anything left. At meals, I noticed her brother's plates were piled high while she consistently got noticeably smaller portions. Sometimes by the time she got around to grabbing snacks after school, everything was already gone. The more I watched it happen, the more wrong it felt. So one day I carefully brought it up to my brother. I assumed maybe they just were not realizing how uneven it looked. Instead, his response honestly shocked me. He basically told me the boys needed more food because they were athletes and still growing, while his daughter was not active enough to justify eating as much. Then he casually added that he did not want her becoming overweight because she spends more time indoors and is not involved in sports. The way he said it made my stomach turn. His daughter is not overweight at all. She is just quieter and less athletic than her brothers. But after hearing him talk about her like that, I started paying closer attention and realized she genuinely seemed anxious around food, almost like she had learned not to ask for too much because she would either get judged or there simply would not be enough left anyway. So I quietly started buying extra things. Nothing dramatic. Just additional snacks, drinks, granola bars, fruit, easy meals, things like that. I kept them in the main kitchen area instead of the guest suite where my brother's family mostly stays. Then one afternoon I proudly told my niece that if she was ever hungry, she could help herself whenever she wanted and did not need permission. I honestly thought I was just making sure a kid felt included and comfortable in my home. Apparently not. A few days later my brother found out and absolutely exploded at me. He accused me of treating him like some abusive father who was starving his daughter. He insisted she gets plenty of food and claimed I was undermining his parenting by secretly creating a separate stash just for her. Then he got even angrier and said that if I was going to buy extra food for one child, I should also be giving his sons unlimited access to it too. That part almost made me laugh because the entire reason I started doing this was because his sons already consume nearly everything before anyone else gets a chance. I told him exactly that. I said his daughter was the only child in the house consistently ending up without food left for her, and pretending otherwise was ridiculous. Now things in the house feel tense and awkward, and my brother is acting like I crossed a huge boundary by getting involved in how he feeds his children. But honestly, I could not keep watching his daughter quietly get pushed aside every day without doing something. Did I ruin my co-worker's engagement by saying no? I'm 27F and work at a sports bar with a guy I call Jason32M. About a month ago, he started telling everyone at work about this elaborate proposal he had planned for his girlfriend. He bought tickets to a huge weekend music festival in another city and apparently wanted to propose during a fireworks show after the final performance. Every shift he talked about how perfect it was going to be. The problem was that Jason somehow forgot to request the weekend off from work. He didn't notice until the schedule was already posted, and unfortunately he was assigned one of the busiest Friday night shifts of the month. Once he realized, he started scrambling to get someone to take it. He asked pretty much everyone first, but most people either already had plans or didn't want to give up a profitable shift. I happened to be off that night, so eventually he came to me. At the time, I had just finished a brutal stretch of workdays and was also helping my cousin move apartments that weekend. I didn't have some huge event planned that night specifically, but I really wanted the evening to decompress and catch up on things. I politely told him I couldn't do it. After that, he got weirdly intense about it. He kept asking what I could possibly be doing that was more important than a proposal, and saying this was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. So I told him I understood it mattered to him, but forgetting to request time off wasn't really my responsibility to fix. Nobody ended up taking the shift, so he had to work most of the evening before driving out to the festival afterward. According to him, by the time he arrived, the fireworks and the big closing song were already over. He still proposed later near the parking area outside the venue, and his girlfriend said yes, but he was furious that the original plan got ruined. Ever since then, he's been making passive-aggressive comments at work about how I destroyed the magic and how some people can't do one favor for another human being. A few coworkers think he's being ridiculous because he created the problem himself, but another coworker said I could have just helped him out since I technically wasn't busy with anything major. Now I'm second-guessing myself a little. Was I wrong for refusing to cover the shift? Was I wrong for snapping at a stranger during a holiday dinner with my uncle? I'm 20th, and last weekend I went out to dinner with my uncle 72M. He's basically the person who raised me after I lost my parents when I was young, so we're extremely close. It happened to fall on Father's Day, but we honestly just wanted to get dinner together and spend time catching up. The restaurant was crowded, and we ended up seated at one of those long padded booths where multiple tables are lined up side by side. Sitting near us was a middle-aged couple. As we sat down, the man smiled at my uncle and casually said, "Happy Father's Day, sir." My uncle smiled and thanked him, and I smiled too because it seemed harmless and friendly. But the man's wife immediately got irritated. She started muttering loudly about how people shouldn't assume things and how it's not his day unless he's actually a father. Her husband tried to brush it off and said he was only being polite. A little while later, the husband stepped away from the table and the woman leaned over toward us. She asked if my uncle was actually my grandfather because he looked too old to be my dad. I explained that he was my uncle, but that he raised me. Instead of dropping it, she started complaining again about how Father's Day is supposed to celebrate real fathers and that people shouldn't accept congratulations that don't belong to them. I tried ignoring her and went back to helping my uncle read the menu because his eyesight isn't great anymore, but she kept repeating herself. Finally, she said something like, honestly, he should have corrected that man instead of pretending the holiday was about him. That's when I lost patience. I turned to her and told her my uncle spent most of his life raising me after my parents died and that he had done more for me than a lot of biological fathers ever do. I said if someone wanted to wish him a happy Father's Day out of kindness, then he absolutely deserved it. She looked stunned and immediately backed off. A few minutes later the couple paid and left, but as they walked out I heard her complain to her husband that I'd been disrespectful and made her feel embarrassed. When I told a few friends afterward, most thought the woman was completely out of line. But one person said I probably could have just ignored her instead of making the situation awkward and emotional in the middle of the restaurant. Now I'm wondering if I overreacted. Was I the asshole? Am I the jerk for secretly buying a house after my mother tried to take the one I paid for? My husband and I entered into a rent-to-own agreement years ago involving a house that was owned by my mother's then-husband. The understanding was that once we fully paid the mortgage, property taxes, and upkeep, the house would become ours. Over time, we were the ones responsible for almost all costs tied to the home. After my mother divorced, she needed somewhere to live, so we allowed her to move into the house with us. We continued paying all housing expenses, while she only covered her personal phone bill and credit cards. When the mortgage was finally paid off, my mother told us she should keep the house instead. She said she had nothing in her name and that we were young enough to buy another home later. I did not want to turn it into a huge conflict, so I decided to look for a new house instead of arguing over it. Every time I mentioned buying another home, she discouraged me. She told me the housing market was bad, interest rates were too high, and that it was not the right time to buy. Meanwhile, she continued traveling while we kept paying the ongoing household costs. My husband and I eventually bought a new house in secret. We completed the purchase, received the keys, and only told her after everything was finalized and we already had a moving date. When I told her, she immediately tried to lecture me about how irresponsible it was. I waited for her to finish and then told her we had already bought the house and were moving that weekend. She became very angry and accused me of betraying her. After we moved out, she complained that we left her house in bad condition, even though we had spent days cleaning it thoroughly before leaving. She also refused to let us take some of our belongings from the garage, saying anything left behind now belonged to her. She later told other family members a completely different version of events, saying she had generously let us live there cheaply and that we abandoned her financially while taking furniture that was not hers. When she visited our new house, she criticized everything about it and then said she felt she deserved it. Now she is struggling financially and keeps suggesting she should move onto my property in a trailer. I am not comfortable with that. Am I the jerk for buying a house in secret and refusing to let my mother move onto my property? Was I wrong for telling my friend he is ruining our group trip? I am currently on a 3-week backpacking trip in Portugal with a group of friends I have known since university: Ella, Jordan, Priya, and Caleb. This trip was planned almost a year in advance as a graduation celebration, and it was meant to be our first long international holiday together. One of my friends, Caleb, has been struggling with his weight and self-esteem for the past couple of years. Some time ago, he opened up to us about binge eating and how it affected his confidence. We tried to be supportive at the time and invited him to join us for workouts, but he did not stick with it for long. After that, he asked us not to bring up his weight anymore because it made him feel pressured, so we respected that and stopped. When we originally booked the trip, Caleb said he was planning to work on his health before we left. We did not push him, but we were hopeful things might improve by the time we travelled. About a month before the trip, he told us he had not made progress and had actually gained weight instead. Since arriving, things have been more difficult than expected. Caleb often talks about feeling uncomfortable walking long distances, worries about being judged in public, and avoids certain activities like hiking, sightseeing, and water park plans. He also sometimes refuses to join activities at the last minute, which has disrupted our itinerary more than once. The situation came to a head when we went to a water park. On the way there, Caleb kept saying he did not think he could go in because he felt insecure about his body and believed people would stare at him. When we arrived, he refused to enter and caused a delay at the entrance while the rest of us were ready to go in. At that point, I told him it was okay if he did not want to participate, but that the constant complaints and hesitation were starting to affect everyone's experience on the trip. I also said he should have thought more carefully about whether a trip with this level of activity was right for him before coming. After that, he left with another friend and went back to our Airbnb. Since then, the group atmosphere has been tense. 2 of my friends think I was justified because his behaviour has been disruptive, while one thinks I was too harsh and should have been more considerate of his mental health. We still have several days left on the trip, and things feel awkward between all of us. Was I wrong for asking the bride to repay me after uninviting me? I ended up getting removed from our wedding 1 week before it happened after helping organise and pay for the bride's bachelorette trip, and now I am wondering whether I crossed a line by asking her to reimburse me afterward. I had known this woman for well over a decade, but I want to make it clear that we were never extremely close friends. We had a long history together, but our relationship mostly consisted of occasional catch-ups where she vented to me about her life. She honestly did not know very basic things about me, including details about my education, my old career, or even major things happening in my life unless I brought them out myself. Still, because of our long history, I stayed supportive. Her relationship with her now husband had always been rocky. She spent years complaining about him to me. When he first proposed, she hated the proposal and hated the ring. At one point, he even privately asked me for advice because he knew she was unhappy. I spent days trying to convince him to rethink things and plan something more thoughtful, but he ignored me. For nearly a year afterwards, she constantly vented about how disappointed she was. Then suddenly everything changed. He proposed again in a more elaborate way, and overnight she acted like the first engagement never existed. From that moment on, everyone around her basically had to pretend this was the greatest romance ever created. Around the same period, my own life completely fell apart health-wise. I developed a serious chronic illness that forced me to stop working entirely. My energy became unpredictable and I had to cancel multiple plans and appointments, including some wedding-related events. Every time I cancelled, I explained exactly why and apologised. I still attended what I physically could and tried to support her however possible. What hurt me was that despite claiming she understood my condition, she never really checked on me or showed much concern about what I was going through. After a while I realised I was putting far more emotional energy into this friendship than she was. Even so, I still helped plan and pay for part of her bachelorette celebration. Unfortunately, my health flared badly again and I physically could not attend the actual trip. A few days later, completely out of nowhere, she sent me a cold message saying she could not handle uncertainty around her wedding and felt I had not made enough effort during the planning process. She said she had decided I would no longer be invited to the wedding and that the decision was final. That was it. No conversation. No warning. No attempt to discuss anything beforehand. The message honestly sounded more like a formal workplace dismissal than something from a long-term friend. The timing made it even more insulting because she had only invited me in the first place 2 days before the RSVP deadline months earlier. Looking back now, I honestly think she may never have truly wanted me there and only invited me out of obligation. The last interaction we had before she removed me from the wedding was her wishing me a happy birthday. So the entire thing blindsided me. I was furious. By that point I had already contributed money toward her bachelorette celebration, bought clothes specifically to fit her required wedding colour scheme, and my partner had arranged time off work because the wedding was happening on a weekday. So I told her that if she was going to remove me from the wedding 1 week beforehand after accepting my help and money for months, then she should at minimum reimburse me for the portion of the bachelorette cost I paid. Now I am wondering if asking for compensation made me petty and vindictive, or if it was reasonable considering how abruptly and coldly she cut me out after benefiting from my time, money, and support. Was I wrong for calling out a stranger's kid in public? I'm a 27-year-old woman living in a mid-sized city in Ireland, and something happened at a supermarket yesterday that's still bothering me. I stopped in after work to grab a few things before heading home, and while I was near the self-checkout area, 2 girls who looked maybe 13 or so came up to me acting nervous and giggly. One of them asked if I could help them buy something. The second she said it, I figured it was probably something they were too young to purchase themselves. I asked what exactly they wanted, and the girl kept dodging the question, saying it was for her cousin and that it was not a big deal. That immediately made me uncomfortable, so I told them no. I explained that if they weren't old enough or allowed to buy it on their own, I wasn't going to step in and do it for them. I also told them they should be careful approaching random adults because not everyone out there is safe. The girl got annoyed almost instantly and started mouthing off at me. At first it was typical rude teenager stuff, calling me ugly and saying I was probably miserable because nobody liked me. I tried to ignore it and started walking away, but then I heard her mutter something nasty about me being one of those weird lesbian women. That honestly caught me off guard more than anything else. I turned around, walked back over, and told her very calmly that if she spoke to people like that, her parents would probably be ashamed of how she behaved in public. I said she needed to learn some respect before talking to strangers that way. She laughed in my face, grabbed her friend, and they both walked off still making jokes. Now that I've had time to cool down, I am wondering if I crossed a line. Part of me thinks I should have ignored the whole thing and kept walking, because arguing with a kid is never a good look. But another part of me feels like somebody needs to tell kids when they're acting horribly, especially when they think insulting random people is funny. I don't have children myself, so maybe I'm overreacting, but the whole interaction genuinely shocked me. Are teenagers really this rude now, or was I wrong for saying something back? Was I wrong for admitting I do not like my daughter-in-law's painting? My daughter-in-law is very artistic and has a small side business selling her paintings. For years she has made artwork for relatives and friends as gifts, and most people seem to genuinely love what she creates. The problem is that her style is simply not my taste. I prefer peaceful landscapes, oceans, forests, and nature scenes without people in them. Her paintings are much more stylized and centered around people with exaggerated features and dramatic proportions. I can appreciate that she has talent, but personally I would never choose the kind of artwork to decorate my home. Recently my husband and I downsized and moved into a smaller house. As a housewarming gift, my daughter-in-law painted a beach scene for us because she knows we enjoy coastal vacations. The painting showed a woman sitting near the shoreline, but the proportions were very exaggerated in the way she usually paints. The legs were unusually long, the body shape was unrealistic, and overall it just was not something I wanted hanging in my living room. When she gave it to me, I thanked her warmly because I did appreciate the effort. I assumed that would be the end of it. I stored the painting in the garage while we finished unpacking and decorating. Later, I bought a large ocean landscape print for the main living area instead. It fit the space perfectly and matched the common style I personally enjoy. A few days ago my daughter-in-law came over to pick up some holiday decorations we no longer had room for. While we were in the garage, she spotted the painting leaning against the wall. She immediately looked surprised and asked why it was not hanging inside the house. I tried to avoid hurting her feelings and simply said I had not found the right place for it yet. But she kept pushing. She pointed out the new artwork in the living room and started suggesting places where her painting could go instead. At one point she literally picked it up and started walking around talking about different walls where it might fit. That was when I finally stopped dodging the question. I told her gently but honestly that her style of artwork is just not really my taste and that I did not want to hang it in the house. The mood changed instantly. She became very quiet, took the decorations, and left shortly afterward. A few hours later my son called me furious. He said his wife had been crying because she spent many hours making a painting specifically for us and felt humiliated knowing I had hidden it in the garage. He told me I should apologize and put the painting up somewhere in the house anyway because it was made with love. I told him I was sorry her feelings were hurt, but I was not going to hang artwork in my home that I genuinely do not like looking at every day. Now the entire situation has become a family issue, and I am being treated like I cruelly rejected some heartfelt gift when from my perspective I simply want the freedom to decorate my own house the way I want. Was I wrong for getting my neighbour's boyfriend's car impounded? I live in a downtown condo building where parking is basically a blood sport. Finding a free space on the street after work is almost impossible unless you enjoy driving around for 40 minutes while questioning every life decision you have ever made. Because of that, I pay a ridiculous amount every month for a private underground parking spot. That detail matters. About 3 weeks ago, the woman living across the hall, who I will call Brianna, came to my door acting flustered and overly sweet. She explained that her boyfriend had driven in from another city late at night and there was nowhere for him to park. She knew my car was still at the repair garage after an engine issue, so she asked if he could borrow my parking spot for literally one night. She emphasized that phrase several times. One night. I said yes because I was trying to be a decent neighbor and honestly did not think it would become an issue. At the time, my car was still in the shop and I figured helping someone out for a few hours was harmless. The next morning I looked outside and his car was still there. I sent her a polite message asking when he planned to move it. She apologized and said he had gotten home late from work and would move it that evening. He did not. Then another day passed. Then another. By day 4 I was getting irritated because my own car was finally repaired and back with me, meaning every night after work I was now circling blocks hunting for parking while staring at the vehicle parked in a spot I personally pay for every month. Every single time I brought it up, there was another excuse. He was tired. He had an O shift. He forgot. He was leaving soon. At one point Brianna even laughed and told me I needed to relax because it was just a parking space. And meanwhile I was hauling groceries 3 blocks at night because these 2 people had apparently decided my paid spot now belonged to them. By the end of the week I was furious. I sent one final message saying if the car was not gone by the next morning, I would have it removed. She ignored me completely. So the following morning I contacted building management and a towing company. Less than an hour later, the car was gone. You would have thought I committed a crime. Brianna started banging on my door screaming that I embarrassed them and cost her boyfriend hundreds of dollars in impound fees. Apparently he had to leave work to go deal with it, and now they are both telling neighbors that I am petty and heartless. What gets me is that they genuinely seem shocked this happened. I gave them multiple warnings. Multiple chances. I spent days paying for a parking space I could not even use because they decided their convenience mattered more than my property. But now somehow I'm the villain because I finally stopped letting them walk all over me. Did I destroy my relationship with my father by finally telling him the truth? For almost my entire life my father has treated my older brother like the center of the universe while my younger sister and I just existed around him. From the outside, people probably thought we had a perfectly normal family. My father was around, he worked hard, he showed up sometimes, and he was never physically cruel. But inside the house, everything revolved around my brother Evan. His sports mattered most. His interests mattered most. His schedule controlled the family calendar. If my sister or I had something important happening but it clashed with one of Evan's events, we already knew who our father would choose. Every single time. It was not even subtle. My father talked about Evan constantly like he was some future legend. Meanwhile, my sister and I learned very young not to expect too much attention. We became the easy kids because there was no point fighting for scraps of affection we knew were already reserved for someone else. Over the years, that kind of thing changes you. Eventually, you just build your own life emotionally separate from them because it hurts less that way. The reason everything exploded recently is because of my sister's career. Growing up, my father and Evan both dreamed of getting into this extremely competitive industry. Neither of them made it. They ended up in decent careers, but there was always this bitterness around the fact that they never got their dream. Then my sister actually did it. Against all odds, she landed a major role in that exact world and has been doing incredibly well. It is honestly impressive and I am unbelievably proud of her. But suddenly my father transformed into this deeply invested parent overnight. Now he constantly wants updates about her career. He wants details about projects, coworkers, opportunities, all of it. The thing is, my sister barely talks to him. She keeps conversations short and avoids opening up. And honestly, I do not blame her. A few weeks ago my father and I got into an argument over something stupid. Then out of nowhere he started complaining that my sister and I never call him unless we need something. He specifically brought up how hurt he was that my sister would not talk to him about her career. That was the moment years of resentment finally burst out of me. I asked him what exactly he expected after spending our entire childhood making it painfully obvious that only one child truly mattered to him. I told him the only reason he suddenly cared so much about my sister's career was because she succeeded at the dream he and Evan failed to reach. Then I really went in. I pointed out that I work in a completely different field and he barely knows anything about my life because he has never bothered asking. I told him he had decades to build relationships with his daughters, but he chose over and over again to worship his son instead. And then I said the part that completely changed the atmosphere. I told him he dug his own grave. I said if his daughters feel distant from him now, that is because he created that distance himself brick by brick for years. He cannot suddenly act shocked that we are not emotionally close after spending most of our lives feeling second place in our own family. He just stared at me after that. Ever since the argument, things have been icy between us. Apparently he has stopped asking my sister about her career completely now. My mother says I crushed him and that maybe he never realized how obvious the favoritism was. Was I wrong for refusing my mom's sleeping arrangement rules in my own home? I'm 26F and I recently moved into a new house with my boyfriend 27M. We both work full-time, split expenses, and have been living together for over a year without issues. A couple of weeks ago, my parents came to visit for the first time since we moved in. They live a few hours away, so we offered them the guest room so they could stay overnight instead of driving back late. The visit started off fine. We gave them a tour, had dinner together, and things seemed normal. Later in the evening, when everyone was getting ready for bed, my mom asked where my boyfriend was going to sleep. I said he would be sleeping in our bedroom as usual. She immediately said that was inappropriate and insisted he should sleep on the couch or in the guest room while they were there. My mom has always been pretty traditional and has expressed disapproval about us living together before marriage, but I didn't expect it to turn into her trying to set rules in my home. I told her no, that wasn't going to happen. I explained that we weren't going to change our sleeping arrangements just because she was visiting, and that there was nothing disrespectful or inappropriate about us sharing a bedroom in our own house. She didn't drop it and said that as my mother she expected me to respect her values while she was under my roof. My stepdad also jumped in and said I should just make an exception for one night to avoid tension. The conversation escalated, and eventually the visit ended early. My parents left and got a hotel for the night instead of staying with us. Afterward, my mom sent me messages saying I embarrassed her and that I was being disrespectful, and some relatives have since said I should have just agreed to keep the peace. My boyfriend says I didn't do anything wrong, and most people on his side agree, but now I'm second-guessing whether I handled it too rigidly. What do you think?